The Chesapeake and Ohio Railway throughout the 1930s and 40s had embarked on an extensive advertising and public relations program. The C&O's head of marketing and public relations, L.C. Probert, was the man spearheading this operation. This led to a kitten named Chessy, and soon enough her accompanying family, to become the mascot of the railway. Chessy and her family would be frequently used to advertise the C&O's then newly air-conditioned sleeping car-equipped trains with the slogan, "Sleep like a kitten and arrive fresh as a daisy." The C&O would then often be simply referred to as the Chessy as well. With all this in place, Robert R. Young, an American financier, had acquired controlling interest in the Chesapeake and Ohio, Pere Marquette, and other railroads in 1942. He sought to develop new luxury passenger trains, envisioning an optimistic post-war ridership outlook. As for the C&O, the railroad was not exactly well known for its passenger trains apart from the George Washington, or Sportsman. As the new chairman of the C&O in 1942, Young looked to improve upon existing services and develop new ones, leading to the idea of a luxurious streamlined passenger train using a revolutionary and experimental locomotive. This would become known as the Chessy, named after the railroad's mascot. The service would run 666 miles daily between Washington, D.C. and Cincinnati, Ohio in 11 hours and 45 minutes without needing to change locomotives. Additionally, there would be connections to Newport News in Norfolk, Virginia, Charlottesville, along with Louisville, Kentucky at Ashland, West Virginia. The train would make use of brand new equipment specifically built for the train. An order of streamlined equipment would be placed in 1946. This consisted of 48 cars from the Budd Company for the Chessy train, including combination, standard and family coach, dining, and lounge dome cars. This was soon followed by a 287-car order that November for Pullman Standard to re-equip the C&O's entire passenger fleet with all new lightweight equipment. The locomotive to power the Chessy train would be an experimental coal-fired steam turbine electric locomotive. With the onset of new diesels, the C&O was still hoping to hang on to steam and coal, considering 30% of their coal business was moving coal for use in locomotives. Steam turbine locomotives had been tested in the United States as early as the late 1930s on the Union Pacific Railroad, but had never really been proven reliable. However, testing persisted, and this was the case for the Chesapeake and Ohio. Between 1947 and 48, at a cost of $1.6 million, 3 M1 locomotives would be delivered to the C&O by the Baldwin Locomotive Works. A great amount of time and money was devoted to research and development of these unusual-looking engines. Built using a streamlined modern style, the M1s were the longest single-unit locomotives in the world for their time. The M1s even had their own streamlined coaling towers built at Clifton Forge, Virginia, and Hinton, West Virginia. They were built in such a way that the locomotive could quickly refuel while boarding passengers. The locomotives were rated for a top speed of 100 miles per hour and produced 6,000 horsepower with 98,000 pounds of starting tractive force. They came in at a length of 154 feet and 3/4 inches, a height of 16 feet 4 inches, and weighed in at 1,360,200 pounds. The locomotives had a single Westinghouse turbine driving 4 direct current generators mounted in pairs. The engines also had no cylinders, leading to less moving parts. In theory, the M1 should have been less maintenance heavy than the average steam locomotive. The engine's designers figured they could make the round trip between DC and Cincinnati without requiring service. With such impressive dimensions, the M1s measured 29 feet longer than C&O's 125-foot long H8 Alleghenies and were 23 feet longer than Union Pacific's 4884 Big Boys for comparison. They were the largest locomotives in the world at the time of their construction. C&O's M1s were painted in a blue, yellow, and gray paint scheme, with the company name proudly displayed as its own separate piece on the side. They were definitely a departure from typical C&O power of the time. The M1s were numbered 500 to 502. 500 went on a publicity tour in 1947, and then in summer 1948 went to be displayed at Chicago's Railroad Fair. The Chessy was promoted as the most luxurious all-coach train put to rails. The train was planned to have some notable features like 2 dome cars. Another notable feature were bedrooms were moved to the center of the coaches where the ride was smoother. Coaches were also partitioned to open up the cars more for passengers, provided twin-unit diners, baby changing rooms, a theater for kids, and most interesting of all, fish aquariums. While all of this sounded great, none of these plans ever came to fruition. For starters, the M1 turbines, like most American steam turbine locomotives of the time, were proving unreliable, with number 500 experiencing many service failures during tests in 1947. Upon number 500's initial tests out of Clifton Forge, Virginia in November 1947, the engine's turbines couldn't handle the jarring movements and intensive beatings of railroad service. Dirt, dust, and other particles also caused issues with the engine's equipment and traction motors. Because of this, they were nicknamed sacred cows. On top of all of this, the M1s are rather complex from an engineering standpoint and quite expensive to operate. While the mechanical issues were worked out and the turbines ran limited amounts of revenue freight and ordinary passenger trains, this couldn't save the Chessy train project. Strikes at Baldwin, Pullman, and Budd in 1947 had delayed the delivery of the Chessy's equipment to mid-1948. Competition from the Baltimore and Ohio had also risen in February 1948 with their own streamliner between Cincinnati and Washington, D.C. And finally, to add insult to injury, Robert Young's optimistic prospects about post-war American rail travel were quickly dashed. Passenger traffic, which peaked at 6.7 million in 1944, had fallen to 3.9 million in 1947 and dipped to 3 million in 1948. Young had wanted the Chessy train running by 1946, but with mounting financial troubles from large equipment orders, quickly declining ridership numbers due to the popularity of automotive travel, and the failure that was the M1 turbines, the service was quietly cancelled in September 1948 before ever turning a revenue wheel. The Chessy's passenger cars went to numerous railroads, whereas others were relocated to services on the C&O, like the intercity Pierre Marquette streamliners in Michigan. While some would be scrapped, others survived into Amtrak service, and others now operate as private cars. The M1 locomotives were briefly put into service on other trains between Clifton Forge and Charlottesville, Virginia until 1949. Shortly after, in 1950, all 3 units were scrapped. The only other semblance of the Chessy train that remained during the steam era were the streamlined L1 Hudsons. They were built to work in cooperation with the M1s, bearing a similar appearance to the turbines for use on the Chessy's connecting trains. The only remaining L1 is number 490, preserved at the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad Museum in Baltimore, Maryland. There were other remaining landmarks from the turbine project as well. These included the uniquely streamlined infrastructure of Fort Spring Tunnel in West Virginia, along with the Prince, West Virginia train station, both of which were designed with the streamlined modern style, similar to the turbine. While the Chesapeake and Ohio's Chessy train never came to be, the railroad at least managed to hold out its other services until Amtrak's takeover in 1971. And even then, remnants of the train are still preserved to this day, reminding everyone of what could have been one of the most luxurious passenger trains in the United States.